Democratic Senator Patty Murray has told PBS that the Senate will vote next week on a bill to codify abortion and make it legal in every state. This is in response to growing unrest and mounting calls to codify Roe in the wake of Alito's leaked abortion memo.
Meanwhile, President Joe Biden's administration is looking at grants to help fund expanding access to emergency contraception if the Supreme Court does overturn Roe. In a press briefing, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki told reporters, quote, "What we have done to date, where we have seen restrictions, is created, for example, the Dire Need Grant Awards, which provide funding to expand access to emergency contraception."
Law enforcement authorities across the country are preparing for the possibility of violence and civil unrest in reaction to the leaked SCOTUS draft. This, according to internal reports obtained by Yahoo News.
Do you think there'll be rioting widespread rioting if the decision goes the way it's expected to go?
I don't know. Maybe I'm overly cynical.
I don't think so. Yeah.
I don't think so
either.
What's your reasoning, Kim?
Well, I just, this, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know which way you want to look at it, but abortion affects a very small group of people. So even though it's women, it's not all women, right? Because a lot of women are not of reproductive age anymore, or a lot of women would not ever get an abortion. And so the numbers are smaller and smaller. And so I just don't think that there's enough women of reproductive age who would want to get it. Because you have to remember, a lot of women are very pro-life still. So even in that group, you don't have, it would be one thing if all women of reproductive age or just all women in general were very pro-choice. But that's not the situation. It's still very divided even amongst women. So I just don't see it being, I see protests for sure. I just don't think it's going to, and men don't, I don't think men are going to come out for women's issues. I don't see enough of a group getting together for it to cause any sort of real commotion.
Yeah, my concern is that the flip side of a lot of the rhetoric that points out the fact that it's an issue that disproportionately affects low-income women is that low-income women are disempowered. They tend to have to go to work. They're not the people who usually occupy protests, which tend to be populated by the more affluent folks who can be at a park at noon in the middle of the workday, and that ultimately, like so many other issues affecting the poor, this was going to go by the wayside.
Yeah.
Well, and you have to remember it would disproportionately affect poor Black women, because we have to also recognize that poor Hispanic women, they're actually the least likely to get abortions, just for religious reasons, for actual, they're just one of the lowest groups to get abortions.
The stats, I think the stats we heard from a guest yesterday were that it's about high 30s white women.
It's older than you might expect is what I'm...
Oh, the average age, yes, is in the 30s, and most people have already had at least one child, but that it's kind of broken into thirds. It's not over 50% white women, but it's like in the 30s, and then the rest was split up between Black and brown women, with Black women having a higher percentage than brown women. But kind of, I don't want to overstate the difference between those chunks. I think that you're right that Hispanic women, for religious reasons, are the smallest of those groups, but it's still disproportionately, the bulk is Black and brown women. And as you point out, Kim, those tend to be the groups that are not politically represented in these kinds of contexts.
I wanted to throw out an interesting thought. I saw this being expressed on Twitter yesterday. Sagar, former host of this show, retweeted it. I saw Matt Gaetz discussing it a little bit. It was Dave Portnoy, who's Barstool Sports guy. He was talking about this, and he was saying, I guess he's very pro-choice. And, he's of the kind of, a little bit of the Joe Rogan variety type, basically liberal, or would have been described as liberal, or I don't know, maybe even left on some stuff, but thinks woke cancellation stuff is really bad and really serious, and has turned him off of Democrats and more toward Republicans. I'm that's a kind of summary of a type of person who exists. Lots of individual differences there, but that kind of person. And Portnoy was saying that, if abortion is the issue, then that this is on the table makes me go back to being very much supportive of Democrats. Yeah. And I wonder how many, or if there's a large enough constituency of Portnoy, Rogan type people, and again, I don't even know Rogan's specific views on this, so I'm really painting with a very broad brush here. Don't get me wrong, but if there is a kind of constituency who was moving away from Democrats over woke stuff, cancel culture, whatever you want to call it, but is back in play because of this. And maybe that's not very many people, or maybe it is a great number of people of young men who actually also think access to abortion is important. I don't know.
Yeah, for every woman who's gotten an abortion, there's a man who didn't have a kid who would have otherwise. And, I know that this is framed as a women's issue, and obviously it affects women most pointedly. But I think there are probably more than a few men who
women. Don't you mean birthing persons? What's a woman, Briahna?
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm not familiar with this terminology. We can't define it even at the Supreme Court level.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of men who will. Maybe they're not very vocal about all of this, but certainly have a lot at stake. And whether they're going to be populating protests, that's an interesting question as well. I did see that Kshama Sawant, the Seattle City Councilwoman, first elected socialist to political office in however many years, was saying that we shouldn't put our eggs in the basket of codifying Roe. To the earlier point in this segment, it doesn't seem like Biden has any interest in getting rid of the filibuster, and this seems like a performative gesture since it's obvious that there's not the votes in the Senate to actually pass something like this. What her point was that it is going to take, whether or not we think it's likely, a huge uprising that's a popular uprising to get this and any number of other progressive agenda items passed. And I think I agree with her that that's how historically across the world women have agitated for reproductive rights. It's how historically we got to a place where, we started to shift the public opinion on Roe. Obviously, the Supreme Court preempted, I think, that shift in a way that we're still dealing with now in terms of political consequences. But people who are hoping there's a kind of a left outcome here and that the right to choose is codified or protected in some meaningful way outside of just kind of judicial fiat should be hoping that we're wrong about the likelihood of mass protests.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, Florida Representative Matt Gaetz said in a recent tweet, by the way, how many of the women rallying against overturning Roe are overeducated, underloved millennials who sadly return from protests to a lonely microwave dinner with their cats and no Bumble matches. That's a pretty specific image.
I didn't take offense because I have a lot of Bumble matches. So. This one's not about me.
There you go. Yeah. But like I said, it's not just that person that he's describing, but like I was seeing some of the anti-woke male crowd kind of going back the other way, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, well, this tweet received a slew of reactions, with many users on Twitter saying that calling women, quote, overeducated for caring about their basic freedoms is a concise way to expose how, quote, anti-woman, anti-education, and anti-freedom the Republican Party is. Other people took this as an opportunity to make a stab at Gaetz's own love life. Look, when are people going to learn that personalizing this stuff, whether it's AOC saying that people are really mad at her because they want to go out with her, whether it's Elon Musk, punching back at her for that statement, that kind of bringing your personal romantic dramas into these things is usually not going to work out for you.
Yeah. No.
I wonder if with, going back to codifying it, I wonder if there could be some sort of more of a consensus if I think the debate is so charged and emotional, but if people just said, look, we just want to codify like the first trimester, the first 12 weeks or the first 14 weeks, then that, like, how many people would actually be on board with that rather than just this sort of feeling? Because I feel like on the right, they're more upset about late term. Even though late term is not actually a thing that's really done almost anywhere in the country, I think there's only a couple of states that actually still allow for that outside of a woman's life being in danger or something like that. But maybe if they shortened it and said, look, we want to definitely codify at least the first 14 weeks nationwide, and then state by state they could decide on the rest. I mean, do you think there would maybe be more of a appetite for that?
Well, that's an interesting point.
I would probably accept that as someone who's not as more muddled views on this than you both have and many of the people we've talked to. I would certainly preserve the ability to do it in the first the first trimester, some number of weeks, and might be and would probably be fine prohibiting it at the state level at other.
Roe established the first trimester. That was already what Roe V Wade said.
Right.
Casey established 23 or 24 weeks. And it's worth noting that the reason that the trimester system was set up in Roe, they were going to aim for a shorter period of time, which is frankly what exists, 12 to 14 weeks in other parts of the world, including countries that we consider to be more progressive than the United States had that shorter time limit. But when they were deciding Roe, Thurgood Marshall, part of the consideration was that we don't have universal health care. We don't have any kind of health care access in this country. Right. And they were concerned that it would just take women a longer period of time to even figure out and then get access to care. So that's kind of why we have a longer time frame than other countries in the world, which is ironic, obviously, from my perspective as a progressive. But I would point out, Kim, that the plaintiffs in the Dobbs case that's at issue here, they asked for a a broader decision. They didn't want to just decide on a 15-week limitation that was on the books in Mississippi. They wanted an all or nothing, up and down, and that's part of Alito's justification in the opinion for ruling on Roe and Casey more broadly instead of just saying, oh, I'm going to limit it to 15 weeks. So there's this tension between what certain people want, at least the conservatives in the Supreme Court, what the advocates in Mississippi actually wanted in terms of outcomes, and what the general public might want to have a consensus on.
Yeah, I just think that the country would probably be more on board with maybe a 15-week limit to abortion, and then states could then decide after that point. And I wonder if it would tamper the debate completely. If it would actually, if they could get that through, and this would maybe be a motivation for Democrats to codify, at least up to that point, is maybe it would then stop the debate, and stop giving Republicans something to run on. But what else are they going to run on at that point? I mean, they could run on it on a state-by-state issue. You could say in Colorado, for example, which has abortion all the way up until whenever, they could maybe then have some sort of a rally, a battle cry for Colorado, but it wouldn't necessarily be a nationwide thing unless they're wanting to absolutely abolish it, even on a state level, that a state can't even decide on a state-by-state choice. That maybe would be something, but then that would go against the Republicans being more about federalism. So I just think it would maybe be even a Democrat's benefit to just codify it up to 15 weeks around the country and then rip that debate away. Can I just end this?
Another thing I would like to do that I've forgotten to mention until now is over-the-counter birth control. This is FDA reform. Yep. Absolutely ridiculous that you can't just buy it at CVS or Walgreens or whatever.
Absolutely. That and the morning after pill, which also you have to go to the counter and get from the pharmacist. And also just maybe changing the way we teach women's health and maybe making it part of an every month cycle, testing yourself for pregnancy. But the point of that would only be if you had access to termination in that first trimester. I don't know. Lots we could do with it. But.
Indeed. Coming up, we'll break down Bill Gates' comments over the lab leak theory. Stick around for that.